Good afternoon. It's a Sunday, and I am beyond thrilled to introduce a friend of mine who had a job for many years that I wish I could have had. His name is Rich Key. You may not know him by name, but you will know his work. He was the team photographer for the LA Dodgers for many years, and Rich has stories, and his photography is phenomenal. He has some of the best images I've ever seen of players and moments, and he has the eye to capture the moments. Rich, welcome.
Bob, thank you for having me. It's fun to be able to join you and to speak with one of my colleagues that I certainly respect your work.
Thank you, Rich. I appreciate that. Rich, tell me how you got the job. Tell everybody, how did you get the job with the Dodgers?
Before I tell you that and I get lost in my stories, I have to tell you something I was thinking about earlier this week. And this is a true story, and to bring it into perspective, Bob. Some time ago, years back, I was born and raised back east in New Jersey in a very modest neighborhood and home. And we knew everybody on the block, and all the kids are lifetime friends. And I went back to visit the area, and my buddies got together with us, and we walked the street. And I went down the street, stopped, introduced myself to the homeowners of the home that I grew up in, and they were kind enough. I walked through that house. I went into the attic. I went to my bedroom, went in the basement, and so forth. It was a flood of memories. It was one of the greatest days of my life. And the buddies that I was with, we were fortunate enough that those new homeowners did the same thing. We knew every crack in the sidewalks. We played outside all the time. That was our life. That was our generation. And I draw that parallel, Bob, to going onto your site and visiting ballparks that I've been in, especially as a kid growing up being a Mets fan. And when I see the work that you've had of Shea Stadium, I sit there and I look at those images, and I can't tell you, it's like going home and walking that street of mine and visiting the house and walking through, seeing those pictures of the concourses and the different angles of Shea Stadium. Shea Stadium, most ball players thought it was a dump. They hated it. It didn't have much personality, but to me, it was a cathedral. I'll tell you, it was so much fun. You can't take that away from me. The thing is gone, but if you go to your site, anybody that's a baseball fan will find their home field, and I'm sure experienced the same thing that I did. And I can't thank you enough for that. That's something special. Keep the history going. That's part of what we do is keep that alive. And I can't compliment you enough on it.
Rich, that you just made my year. I mean, if coming from you, I mean, I've respected your work for years. I've always wondered who this guy was, but for you to say that means the world to me. I mean, you're a world-class photographer, and to bring back memories, that's exactly why I do what I do. I want people to feel like, oh man, I sat in this section or that section. I brought my girlfriend here, or my first date, or my wife, and that's why I do what I do. Our photography is a little different. Yours was obviously action and the Dodgers and the World Series and everything. And I just try to bring back, memories for people, and that's why I do. And again, thank you so much.
Yours was in focus. Mine was maybe half the time.
So
Bob,
tell us, like,
I think of Shea Stadium, and I just remember looking at your photographs. I think of my dad taking me out for a doubleheader, and we would take the train to we get out there at Flushing and get off the train and walk down those steps in right field corner, looking into the ballpark and seeing the green grass and the excitement, and hurrying over to the ticket window to buy the tickets. And here I am, a kid, 10 years old or younger, with a glove in my hand, and always trying to encourage my dad to buy a yellow ticket because the yellow tickets were the field level seats. And, and and my dad was old school. He goes, no, 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 no. The best seats in the ballpark is a mezzanine. You get to see. Well, he was right. You got to see the game much better, but you don't catch foul balls in the mezzanine.
no. Yeah, Shea Stadium's mezzanine was up there, and I thought Shea Stadium was an erector set. That's what I call it. It looked like a giant. As a kid, as you know, walking through Shea Stadium and the concourse and everything, they've got all the girders and the beams. It was like a giant erector set. Remember the toys when we were kids.
Right. I remember my first road trip into New York with the Dodgers. Um, as a team photographer, I remember walking the stadium, getting there early just to walk the stadium. Um, and it was quiet and it was beautiful. You can't take it away from anybody.
Now Fred Clare got you the job with the Dodgers.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I just got to throw that rope around me,
that's all right.
pull me in. I went to school and I had no, I graduated and I had no experience in sports, but I knew one thing and I wanted to marry my passion for sports, especially baseball, with a profession. And so I didn't have a single sports photo to show, but I figured I'm going to contact the Dodgers, throw a proposal at them, and see if they would be interested in giving me a chance to shoot. And quite honestly, if they didn't like it because it wasn't going to cost them a penny, they could purchase it afterwards. If they didn't like it, I could always go down the 5 freeway and make my proposal enhanced with some sports images at that point to the Angels. But I never that never materialized. I wound up doing the presentation. Fred gave me several games to shoot, put it all together, and it was the beginning of my baseball experience with the Dodgers. It went well. It was nerve wracking. I was very nervous. I was a kid of like I think 22 years old and uh, couldn't believe I was walking the hallways of Dodger Stadium and I set the thing up. It was very antiquated back then. In '76 it was, and projectors, Kodak slide trays, hoping that the sound system would everything would sync and go off. And I set it up in the boardroom. Went back to Fred's office and told him I was ready. He said, "Let's do it. Let's see it." And on the way to the boardroom, if I wasn't nervous enough, Fred stopped and said, "Hold on a minute, Rich." And he leaned into Peter O'Malley's office. The door was open, and he said, "Peter, do you have a moment? I want you to see something." And honestly, God, my legs were shaking at that point. He gave me the ultimate compliment to invite Peter into this meeting and presentation without ever seeing a shot that I took. And it went well. And like I said, that was the start of it. And I was with the club for the better part of a decade. And it was a special, very special time. We got to see the transition of Alston to Lasorda and Fernando Mania, record infield that we had. Um, and along with that, several trips to the postseason, the best one culminating in '81 at Yankee Stadium.
Did you get your World Series ring?
No, no ring, but a ton of memories.
Let's call Jerry Royce and maybe he can arrange something and get you a ring.
Between Royce and John Stone and a few of those others, it may be plastic, but
That was my point. You knew it was going to be something, because with those two, I mean, they were like we've talked before we started taping. Jerry Royce and Jay Johnstone were like two little kids, and they were there to have fun. Except like you were saying, when Jerry pitched, you didn't talk to him, but they were, they made fun because
Jerry was the most passionate player during my time at Chavez Ravine on a game day. Um, there was two people that I always remember. I mean, that's not to slight anybody else, but I just remember anybody, especially when it came to a pitcher on the mound. There was Royce and my buddy throughout all those times was Terry Forster. Neither one of them you couldn't mess with them. They were there and they were there to handle their business.
Terry Forster, you bring up a name, and everybody thinks of David Letterman and the fat tub of goo, and he ran with that. He kind of embraced that, didn't he?
At that point in his career, it was winding down, and he was he wasn't going to fight it. There was a great line when he was with Atlanta at the time when it happened, and Letterman started in his monologues about the big fat tub of goo, and I can't believe this guy I saw on TV and all this stuff. So it went on for a couple of weeks, and then finally it turned out that they went NBC Game of the Week. They went to Terry to get his reaction about Letterman, digging him and giving him a hard time. And true to Terry's sense of humor, he says, you know, when I grew up in North Dakota, I think it was, or South Dakota. He says, and we had a lot of property, and we had some animals there, and he says, and I had this one particular donkey. He says that for some reason, as a kid, I would harass the hell out of that thing. He says, and I would poke it with a stick, and I get it all riled up and upset. He said, and I kept at it, and then finally I got my ear pulled by my old man and grabbed me and pulled me away from it and said, you know what? One day you're going to live to regret it because that jackass is going to grow up and he's going to kick your ass. He says, little did I know it was going to be Letterman. So they went back and forth, and eventually Letterman had Terry on the show.
I remember that night. I watched the show.
Yeah. Terry was one of the most generous, nicest people in the world. You know, none of those ball players made enormous amount of money those years, but if he had money in his pocket, you were not allowed to touch your wallet. That was just the way he rolled, and we had a great time.
He's just the opposite of Tommy Lasorda, right?
I think Tommy's still carrying his bar mitzvah money with
him. Yeah, Tommy was notorious for the alligator arms, and all of a sudden he can't grab his wallet. But that's and give me your best Tommy list.
Trust me, that's out there, and it's a good line for people. But he does have a heart, and I've actually seen him reach in and do it the right thing. And
yes, give him.
Tommy's Tommy, but there's also, you know, there's a soft side to him.
Give me your best clean version of a Lasorda story that you think is out there. You know, we've all heard the Kingman tapes and the Bavacqua tape, but one that people may not really know that you just went away laughing.
Can I tell you the story about the night I was shooting in Philadelphia with Lasorda? Well, this is classic Tommy in many ways. What had happened was, long story short, it was 1977, and Tommy was the new manager for the Dodgers. And going into the ballpark that day on the bus, I thought, you know what? Let me come up with a different angle. And I thought, what I'd like to do is take some pictures from the dugout. And so I pictured a wide angle shot of some player coming in, congratulating maybe after a home run or a hit. And so, you know, you don't get photos from inside the dugout perspective. So let me try it. So I need to get some permission. So I go upstairs to the Phillies front office and speak to one of their VPs and introduce myself, tell them what I wanted to do, and asked if they would allow me to do that. Because I'm naive, but I figure it's the Phillies at home stadium. They're going to give me the permission, and they did. And little did I realize that after I walked out of their office, they probably all had a good laugh, because I did not know at the time, and I suspect they knew, that the only permission that you could get, and you're not going to get it, is from the umpire and crew. And once the ball game takes place, they're fully in charge. And inside the dugout, you're only allowed to have the players or clubhouse personnel. Well, I went in naive, not knowing, and about the third or fourth inning, Dusty Baker hits a home run, comes into the dugout, and I have my wide angle. I think I was shooting a 20 millimeter. And as it turns out, Lasorda's between me and the steps, the dugout steps, and Dusty coming in. And I got the shot that I envisioned. And it was not digital back then. It was all film. But if you're shooting enough, you know at the time when you capture an image, you've got what you were looking for.
Yeah.
You didn't have to look on the LED screen to know. So I felt good about it, and it was done. I felt good. I accomplished what I wanted. I walked down to the end of the dugout towards where Tommy was standing in his position near the steps, and I'm standing there, and the crew chief was the home umpire. His name was Ed Vargo, a veteran umpire. And Ed had gotten back to the plate area, and he noticed me, and he started motioning for me to leave. And Tommy is wondering what's going on. And Tommy says to me, what's he doing? What's going on? I says, he's motioning to me to leave because I guess I'm not supposed to be here. I says, but this is where I made the mistake. I said, Tommy, I says, I got permission. I got permission from upstairs with the Phillies. And that was a mistake that Tommy turned, and Tommy doesn't like to be challenged. And he yells back to Ed, the kid is with us. Leave him alone. And at that, Bargo took that, and he didn't take it well. And the mask came off. He started walking towards Tommy. Tommy pushes his way past me, and he jumps up to the stadium, onto the field. And I was smart. I got out of the area. I went up the tunnel, and Tommy starts to have a conversation with Ed Bargo. And I'm halfway up the tunnel, scared to death that I'm losing my job. And our bench coach, Monty Basco, at the time, Monty is laughing, bent over, having a great belly laugh. And he's relaying back to me up the tunnel. And he's going, Rich, you're in trouble. And I'm standing there, and Monty continues to laugh. I can't see anything but Monty. And Monty says, oh, no, Rich, you've been removed from the game. And I go, how the hell could I be removed from the game? I'm a photographer, for crying out loud. Well, a moment or two later, Tommy comes bouncing back into the dugout, sees me hiding up in the tunnel, had a few choice good words for me about hiding after he's out there defending me. But it was all his form of teasing, and he was going to have fun with it. Well, I got banished to the clubhouse. I stayed the rest of the day, the game up in the clubhouse, and I felt good. For one thing was that photo. I got the photo, and it's probably one of my most favorite shots, action that I've taken over the years. But in hindsight, when I look back at this was Tommy's first return back to Philadelphia, which is his hometown outside Norristown, outside of Philly. And he must have had a laundry list of friends and freebies on the ticket list. And the TV televised game, he saw that as an opportunity to get some airtime at Rich's expense, and he took it and ran with it. So God bless Tommy. He had fun with it, and I got the shot. So, but that's Tommy. If he gets a chance to have the light shown, he grabbed it, especially at that point in time. And we all have good memories about it.
Tommy in the limelight, you're kidding me, right? No, Tommy, growing up in LA, I mean, when Tommy took over the Dodgers, he was so much reversed from what Walt Alston was. Smokey was, very stoic, and it was by the book. And then Tommy is Tommy. I mean, after all, I mean, everybody called him the fat little Italian, and he was
Well,
a show.
I only remember one Padre calling him that.
You mean Bavacqua?
Yes.
There was a few others that used to call him that too that I've heard, but
I'm sure there were. But,
yeah, and a few other words to go along with Italian, and that we won't repeat.
but Tommy's in the Hall of Fame, and I imagine most of the others aren't.
Yeah, and he gets a free dinner in Cooperstown too, so it's all good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jane Forbes Clark always has the Hall of Famers over for a dinner before the induction. So that those are stories and a half, and that's you can't get in that. That's private. I would love to be a fly on the wall for some of those.
She's an amazing shooter, and I'm enjoying her work. And now that she's got a series of portraits that she's going to be sharing with us, and I'm looking forward to that.
What is your you've been to many World Series. What is your biggest thrill? I'm going to guess it's going to be 1981 when the Dodgers won the World Series in New York against the Yankees. Is that your biggest baseball thrill as a shooter?
Yeah, because it was Yankee Stadium, and growing up as a kid in the house that Ruth built, it was special that World Series was culminated there at Yankee Stadium. I would have to say, yeah, it was that Game 6, and actually, there's a photo that I took of in that Game 6. record infield, maybe you know, Bob, I should know, but I think they played about 9 years together.
It is something like that.
But I think it was 8 or 9 years that they played together, and it turned out that we knew Davy Lopes was leaving. He was not going to stay with the club after '81. So going into postseason, we knew that the breakup was going to take place. And it was game 6 of the World Series, and they still, back then, they would introduce prior to each game the players on the baselines. Um, and so they did that, and that night, as fate would have it, my photo that I was given by New York was down the first baseline, just beyond first base bag, on the first base side. And so Lasorda was introduced, and then, just as fate would have it, his first 4 players that he had in the lineup that night were Garvey, Lopes, Russell, and Say. And I saw it play out in front of me where Garvey came out, and then it was Say, Lopes and Russell, and then Ronnie Say was the 4th one. And those 4 with their backs to me and their names and numbers on the back were all in the same frame. And I got a picture of that is one of my favorite images from that game in overtime. And it was the last time they were together. And we were kind of surprised, too, because we didn't know if we were going to have Ron Say, because if you remember, a couple days prior, he was beamed by Gossage at Dodger Stadium at Game 5. And Ronnie didn't know until just prior to game time if he was going to play. So he was in uniform, suited up for game 6.
Wow. Yeah, because I remember your photo of him laying on the ground. That was your photo, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember watching that game, and I'm thinking,
if I
this
was
guy.
an entrepreneur, I could have made a lot of money, because as it happened, the helmet to save his life rolled right there in front in the foreground in the picture frame. And it was a very scary moment. I mean, it was eerie, and to be perfectly honest, there wasn't a sound in that stadium except, and it was so disturbing, I hate to even talk about it, but Fran, his wife, they were trying to console her up on the mezzanine level behind home plate as they got her out. But that was the only thing you heard in there, and it was horrifying. Everybody was scared to death. And then a few minutes later, they had him on his feet, and he walked in. So.
Wow, that's, I mean, Gossage threw 95 plus, and a ball to the head in those days. Ronnie didn't have the ear flap; he just had the plain old catcher's helmet, and that was before most of them had the ear flaps. And it was almost like when Yeager got hurt in Pittsburgh with the bat stuck him in the. And then he developed the that little thing that hung down from the mask, that protected your Adam's apple.
The trainer, Bill Bueller, is the one who designed that.
That's the Dodgers are full of innovations. Obviously, you think of that, and then you think of some guy who blew out his elbow, and they had a surgery named after him. Tommy John. I mean, he's more famous for his surgery than he is almost as a pitcher. And Tommy pitched for what, 80 years in the majors, it seemed like. He just kept on going with with his new arm.
There's one portrait that I have in my mind that I want to do. I have not approached Tommy. I have to find the place where we're going to do it if he agrees to it. But I want to take a portrait of Tommy. He could be wearing his dress, street clothes, but I want him wearing the jersey. And I want him leaning up against a table, and he'll have a ball in his hand, and he's looking straight into the camera as he stands there. But the table that he's leaning up against is going to be an OR table, and have the lights around it, and have the portrait inside of a operating room. I think it would be a really cool shot.
I do too. And of course, when he had his surgery, that was in the early 70s. And of course, that was, 40, 45 years ago. And they didn't have the medical knowledge then that they do now. And even the doctors said, we don't know if this is going to work or not. And, miraculously it worked. It was almost something like out of some science fiction movie when we heard what was going to happen to Tommy John. Like, this isn't going to work. And boom, here he is pitching 2 years later.
Yep. I often joke that I've got Dr. Job's autograph on my right knee.
Yeah, I know, World. My knees are killing me too. So, but being at Dodger Stadium, you had the luxury of seeing Tommy with a lot of his famous friends, Sinatra, Rickles, Dean Martin, and all of these guys. It was almost like every game was, a celebrity who's on Tommy's guest list or sitting in his office outside the clubhouse. What's your memories with some of these famous people like Sinatra and Rickles?
My favorite was Jonathan Winters. Winters came in and impromptu, and he just did a routine in the clubhouse that just you can't forget it. It was Rickles. He would do the same on occasion. You never knew what to expect, and it was pretty cool.
I've seen some of the stuff that's on YouTube with Rickles and Lasorda, and Rickles is doing his shtick, and it is pretty funny. But they kind of cleaned it up, and I'm sure when they were doing it in the clubhouse, it was a little more colorful, I guess is the word.
Yeah, it would have to have an edit,
Yeah. Or a lot of bleeps.
but that's life.
Now I was reading something, and you were there the day Sinatra did Sinatra actually forget the words to the national anthem? Is that true?
Well, someday the guy that really should explain that and would explain it fair is my mentor, the guy that gave me the job is Fred Clare, because Fred had worked it out with Sinatra, and I guess Sinatra. I'll just give you the short form of it. Sinatra didn't remember the words to it, or knew the words, and he wanted to know what screen he was going to read it off of. And so they went to Helen Dell, and Helen Dell says, "I don't have any sheet music. I play by, you know, by ear." And so Fred says, "Okay." He says, "When you're out in center field, just turn and look at the scoreboard, the message board will have the words up there." Well, it turned out that on day games, I believe it was, they didn't put that out for, there was an issue where it wasn't there. So in the end, it was Sinatra, myself, and a few other shooters out there in center field as I photographed them. But he messed it up. But hey, it's Sinatra. I'm not gonna point it out to him.
Yeah, it is Frank Sinatra after all, and he's Tommy's buddy, and you don't want to, you don't want to get Tommy mad at you.
Right. Opening day. That was opening day, 1977.
That was a great year because I remember going to the USC. Remember, this was going back before the season started in spring training. USC would always come out and play the Dodgers in a scrimmage game, and I remember that 1977. I was sitting in the right field bleachers watching it, and the Dodgers would play the B team pretty much. You weren't going to see Garvey, Say, or Lopes, or any of those guys,
They
but
they would be there, Bob, but they'd show up for like maybe an inning or
yeah,
two.
exactly.
Right.
It was almost like the first spring training game of the year where they're out there for one at bat and then see I'm going out, I'm leaving.
Maybe an appearance. I we talk about that every once in a while, and I believe it was the players' union that put the kibosh on that. So
Yeah, those were fun times because it was free.
right.
The Dodgers let you in for free, and that we were talking before we were taping, and the Dodgers were far and away ahead of most organizations in the way they treated their employees, their fans. They made it fun to go to the ballpark. It's not like it is today where it's all corporate, and how much money do you have?
And for me, in my sake, I was fortunate because their marketing department, they were very aggressive, and they were ahead of a whole lot of other teams in the league. They put a huge emphasis on printed material, collateral, season ticket brochures, yearbooks. I was surprised to see how many ball clubs did not even have a yearbook back in the 70s. And the Dodgers pushed their product. They knew how to market it, and they were the first to get to the 3 million home attendance.
I mean, there wasn't a better place to go as a kid on a Sunday after a Saturday afternoon or a Sunday afternoon than sitting in Dodger Stadium, eating a Dodger dog and having a Coke. You know, I mean, it was fun. It was cheap too
Yeah,
back
yeah,
in the
it was.
'70s.
Right.
Yeah, I remember my first game, there's photos on my website. I was 8 years old, and my biological father took me to a Dodgers Mets game. Claude Osteen pitched in 1967. I have pictures with my little brownie camera, and that's kind of ties into the Vin Scully story I told you about. And it was like the light bulb goes on, but you don't know what to do with it, and it just brought a joy to this 8-year-old little boy who got to see Dodger Stadium for the first time in this giant green grass that I've never seen before. Like, it was a lot of fun. And you lived, basically, you lived in the Dodgers photo well, the Dodgers clubhouse, and the Dodgers dugout for what, a decade. So, you lived every little boy's dream who wanted to be a photographer, a sports photographer.
You know, you talk about those two photos that you have, and I saw them on your website, and they're like blurry. They're
Exactly. I didn't know what the hell I was doing.
there's light flare all over it, and it's just and they're two lousy pictures taken from a seat, and I have to say they're perfect because you don't change, you don't touch that image whatsoever. That was the experience, and you don't perfect with that, and you don't try to edit or Photoshop it. You leave it alone because that's what it is, and you don't want to change it.
Well, it's like you were talking about going to Shea Stadium with your dad, and you can never take those memories. I remember my early youth going to Anaheim Stadium. I grew up in Fullerton, and going to Angel games when they were really, really bad. I mean, they were horrible. And then they got Nolan Ryan, and things changed. But it didn't matter whether they won or lost. You were at the ballpark, like you as a little boy at Shea Stadium. You were at the ballpark. You got to see your heroes. You got to have a hot dog with your dad and watch a ball game. And that to me is Americana and growing up as a little kid in the '60s and the '70s.
Bob, with all the ballparks and the arenas that you've attended and photographed, what one stands out that you had chills and a great feeling going to see and being able to access?
There's two. The first one was in '76. Geez, I thought this was my interview. No, that's okay, Rich. I'm teasing you, man. But the first one was in.
People are bored with Rich, so it's
No, they're not. But the thing is, in 1976, I graduated from Fullerton High. My mom was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. She hadn't been back since 1945, so Dad piled the three of us in his camper, and we drove cross country and stayed at our cousin's house in Providence, Rhode Island, and toured Boston in the area for about 2 weeks. And I'll never forget this. It was July 11th, 1976. The Queen of England was in a parade in downtown Boston. My mom and cousins went to see the parade. I ended up at Fenway Park. And as a kid growing up a Red Sox fan, the goosebumps and the chills. You walk into that building, for me, it was in a dumpy condition. Fenway wasn't what it is today. But still, to see my heroes, Yaz and Fisk and Rice and Dewey Evans and all these guys, I could never top that. I remember the day like it was yesterday. It was hot and humid, like an East Coast guy, a typical East Coast summer night or summer day. And the second one was going to Chicago Stadium for the first time to see the Blackhawks. I've never had an experience like that in my life. I mean, the building shook when the Blackhawks would score a goal. The foghorn would go off. You could, and I'm not making this up, you could not hear the guy next to you. It was so loud. I've never been in a building like that. And it's almost like when Gibson hit the home run at Dodger Stadium. You couldn't hear a thing, against Eckersley and the A's. It was that loud, only in a confined space, and I will never forget those two things.
yeah, that's hard to beat.
It really is. What?
I've never been in the hockey arena in Chicago, but was the old stadium, Madison Square Garden, the old one? As a little kid, I'm a huge hockey fan. And the Rangers were number one to me. The old stadium was very vertical. I mean, you were on top of the action. They rebuilt it, and it was too pancake. You know, it was what you're so far away from the action. The old arenas, they were built really tight. And was that the same way that you had?
Absolutely. At Chicago Stadium, the Boston Garden was the same way because, people don't realize the Boston Garden was built for boxing. They didn't have the NH. The NHL was barely 10 years old when the Bruins started playing there, and the NBA was still 20 years away. So it was built for boxing, and you had the columns, you had the gallery gods in the corner, the west end of the Boston Garden, which were the best seats because that were the true hardcore fans. But the Garden was a dump, and it had its problems. But and I've talked to people about this. It had that intangible that teams hated going there. It was like a lot of the teams hate going to Candlestick to play the Giants because of the weather. And they took that to their advantage. The Bruins and the Celtics did the same thing. The Blackhawks did the same thing, and the Montreal Canadiens at the old Montreal Forum. You very rarely won in that building.
Chicago Blackhawks, my favorite sports jersey for hockey is
I agree.
Blackhawk red jersey, the whole outfit. To me, that's the best.
Who is now? This may be a loaded question, but out of all the Dodgers you've shot, and they could be a retired player, but this is just players. Who is your personal favorite? The one that you, or who is the one that you hold in awe?
Um, I'll give you a two-part answer on that.
Okay.
Um, the one that I hold in awe that befriended me, which to this day I don't understand, but the entire family did with me, and I say that only because it was a thrill. Was the Campanellas, Roy Campanella, and as far as appreciating friendships, there's a couple people. There's two. My buddy throughout that whole time was Terry Forster. Zany, wild world, hanging with Terry. You never knew where you were going to be at what time and where and how to get back in shape to surface the next day. He was he was no walk in the park. And the other guy has to be Garv, because he befriended me in the very, very, very beginning, and it was sincere. He was nice. Uh, Steve gets a lot of you know publicity. Some of the players don't care for it, but Steve is Steve, and I only judge people on how they are with me. We used to go into on road trips. We would go into New York, and it was a thrill for my parents because they were not somebody that really liked to go into New York from Jersey. But if their kid was on a road trip and came into town, my dad would take my mom over and we would have lunch, and the ball club stayed at the Waldorf Astoria, and so it was fun for them to enjoy lunch there. And Garv always made a point of seeing them and saying hello, and that's the way it was. And a few years into that, my mom was stricken with lung cancer, breast cancer, and she was hospitalized, going in for surgery, and it was 77 World Series, and it's 10 minutes before the players are going to be introduced on the field. And he asked me for the number, and he called the house. And my folks are sitting there watching the pregame show from ABC, the World Series, and so on and so forth. And my mom picked up the phone in the kitchen, and it's Steve from the clubhouse calling her to wish her well the next day. Nobody asked him to do it. He did it. It was sincere. And she stood on the phone in the kitchen going with tears running down her face. I can't believe I'm talking to Steve Garvey on my kitchen phone. And we got a good laugh out of it, obviously. But we lost her a few months later. But that's something that you don't forget when people do stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the stories that don't get told a lot. The interpersonal stories that the players don't want the publicity for it. They just do it because they do it out of the goodness of their heart.
Right,
And
they don't even think of publicity because you become a part of an inner family, and you forget about all the other factors, and your guard is down, and you are who you are. And if you're going to be a nice guy, you're going to be a nice guy. If you're going to be difficult, so be it. But that's how it rolls.
What was your, now you've shot all over the National League and some American League and spring training. What was your, outside of Dodger Stadium, we'll throw that out, and Anaheim Stadium since that's Southern California, where was your favorite place to shoot as with the light? Because I was talking to Gene Fruth about the light. You know, light is, for a photographer, even for film, light is so important. But what was your favorite place? What was your favorite
Well,
place to shoot?
it had to be Wrigley because we were so close to it. Um, my least favorite was Jack Murphy Stadium.
Oh, yeah, it's bad for baseball.
And always special was shape, just to be back in shape to do it. But
Having a Nathan's hot dog, right? Or two.
home cooking too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you're an East Coast guy.
All the parks were different. You had different challenges, and also too different was the experience because you get to start to know the different people that were the shooters in those cities that
Yep.
were there, and some would be nice, some you know. You go to the bigger cities like Chicago and New York, they couldn't give a damn. So it was tougher to get a relationship with those folks. But the smaller towns, and you got to develop some friends.
Yeah, Wrigley Field. If people have not been to Wrigley Field, I mean, if you're a baseball fan of any kind, I know it's changed a lot in the last 10 years, but you to see that ivy and to be that close, because you are close at Wrigley in any seat, is a thrill. It's just like Fenway Park, and it's like Old Tiger Stadium in Detroit. You know, where they had the overhangs, and you were literally right in Old Yankee Stadium, where you were on top of the action. And you know, like you said before, now that you're so far away in some of these ballparks, it's just like, why bother even going? You know, it's like a $5 cab ride to get down to the bottom level. You know.
Years ago, family moved to Michigan, and in short order, I made sure I had my son to Tiger Stadium, and he was probably 7 or 8 at the time. And the first game we went to, center field in the bleachers, and I did that for a reason because I wanted him to grow up with the experience of being around fans and standing in line for that hot dog and get the entire experience. Um, Nowadays, you see so many kids that are sitting in a suite with a shrimp cocktail in front of them. They
Oh,
grab, spent $500,000 in their suite for them to do it, and they're not even paying attention to the game. That's a lot.
that's that I agree. It's just, you know, if you're going to go to a baseball game, you know, growing up when we did, we grew up in the same era. You know, you were thrilled to get a hot dog and a Coke and a bag of peanuts or an ice cream, you know, sundae or whatever. And now, you know, it's just, I miss those days. I miss the simplicity of sports in that era. Now it's all corporate, and it's just it takes away from the game.
Bob, years ago when I was with the ball club, if you recall, in Dodger Stadium, we had 2 or 3 rows in the dugout box section.
Yep, yep.
And you got to know those folks over the years, and I've made some terrific friends over the years with them and enjoyed them. But during the game, more often than not, we would get a pool going with some of the guys and families on attendance. And I think it was about the 7th inning they would announce the pool. And right up the tunnel right behind home plate, they had a concession stand to service those folks in that dugout section. And so we would guess what we thought the attendance was. And we were not talking more than $1 that would get you a hot dog and a Coke or whatever. And so we would play the game, and we had so much fun. But the key to the whole thing was whoever won actually lost because you never kept the money. And what would happen is if you happen to win, that meant you went up the tunnel and got hot dogs and brought them. So that was the fun part about it, and the relationship. But one time, I know one game, I I, I couldn't resist it. I got on the phone and I called up to the up to the ticket office about an inning before it was announced, and I said, Tommy, I says, Tommy from the ticket office says, Tommy, I said, what's tonight's gate? What's the attendance? He gave it to me, and I went down and I was one short. I wrote, gave him the number, and I obviously cheating. I gave him one short, and everybody was amazed that I could come within one. And I told him, I says, I says, damn, I forgot to count myself. So it was a good time.
Is there a player that you didn't see that you would have loved to see him play? You know, like before you started shooting, before you actually started going to games.
It would be Kovacs.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean,
It would,
I remember listening to Vin do the Dodger games when I was a little kid, and Sandy was pitching, and I mean, I told the Billy Williams story about his perfect game, and he, most players would say if there was a pitcher they did not want to face, it would be Sandy because he threw so hard, you knew it was coming, you still couldn't hit it, and he was the comet. He had that 6 years where he was lights out. Nobody could hit him, and of course, elbow did him in. But he's a once in a lifetime talent that I am luckily we got to see.
see, that's West Coast because my time was I was spending time watching the Nolan Ryan, the short, stint that he had with the Mets and the Seaver time and so forth. So everybody on the West Coast got to enjoy Koufax and I would add to that Drysdale as well. I would love to watch Drysdale pitch because you know we're all old school.
We all we all are old school, and that's okay with me. I would rather be old school.
Yeah. And on occasion, um, I get to see Annie Drysdale, and she's a total sweetheart. And I shouldn't put it that way. I just think the world of her. She's a very nice person.
There's a picture on my website from my first game where I was too nervous to go up to Don Drysdale and say hi, but I took a picture of him, and I think he has a toothpick in his mouth. But that's the closest I got to Big D. He was an intimidating figure. He was a big dude. He was like 6'6", 240, and to see that on the mound, you'd be scared to death. Is he going to hit me or what? But that's about as close as I got to Drysdale. I've never met Sandy, and if I ever do, it's going to be a thrill. I mean, growing up in Southern California, there was Sandy Koufax and everybody else. Everybody wanted to be Sandy.
I enjoyed the broadcast team of Drysdale and Enberg when they were handling the
Yes, yes, that's what he was doing the Angel games in '77, and of course Dick Enberg. I was lucky growing up in Southern California because we had Chick Hearn with the Lakers, you had Enberg with the Angels, and you had Vin. You couldn't ask for anything better.
who's been.
That guy with the Dodgers that he's been there for 150 years.
Oh, that's the guy that's out of work and he's not looking for work.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's retired now. It must be nice.
Yeah, what a gentleman.
Do you have any Vinny stories, real quick?
Uh,
Oh,
yeah, I do. If you got a moment left,
absolutely.
I it goes back to this is in the late. Well, let's put it this way. We remember Vinny, and what was the two main sponsors for Dodger Stadium were Farmer John and Union 76.
Yep.
And that gas station out in center field in the parking lot, the Union 76 station, they used that quite a bit. And Vinny was one of their spokespersons. So you could count on a telecast. Almost every other inning, you would see Vinny out at the booth or by the pumps pushing the product. And so that's how he was known by it. Um, and that was one of the main sponsors. So we go back, and I've got a daughter, Laura, who's 5 years old. She was born and raised. Ross Porter announced her birth and welcomed her into the Dodger family the day she was born. And that kid grew up thinking that Dodger Stadium was her backyard. She took over from day one. She ran the front office. She could not do any wrong, so she loved it there. And she was about 5 years old one time and watched the telecast whenever she could, as she would. And she's on. I have her behind the cage one day collecting some autographs before batting practice. And Vinny walks out, and he's on the grass, and he stops, and he was terrific with children. And he stopped and he said hello to Laura, and I said she hadn't collected any autographs yet on the ball, and I says, Laura, why don't you ask Mr. Scully if he'd like to sign the ball? So he wrote on the ball, he goes, to my pretty Laura, Vin Scully. And so spent a few minutes with him, and then he moved on, and I took the ball and put it in my pocket. I said, Laura, let me get you another one. We're not going to get any other autographs on this ball. This is special. So fast forward within a week, I get a call from my wife who tells me I just received a call from Laura's kindergarten teacher, and it was show and tell, and Laura took the baseball as her show item. And all I can think of is teacher's call, classmate's got a bump on her forehead or a window's broken. What this is, can't be good. And she says, no, no. The teacher said when it was Laura's turn to speak, she got up in the middle of the circle of her classmates and held the ball up, signed by Scully, and says, this is a baseball signed by Mr. Scully, and sat down. And the teacher said, Laura, would you please stand and explain to your classmates who exactly Mr. Scully is? And she looked at her classmates, and honestly, she just simply told them, Mr. Scully puts gas in your car.
And he has another job too, where he talks for 9 innings.
Yeah, and that's the God's honest truth. And so that afternoon, I'm in the press room grabbing a bite to eat before the game, and Vinny comes in and joins us at the table. I couldn't resist to tell and share the story. And Vinny laughed as hard as the rest of them at the table because he knew the spirit of that little kid and their honesty, and he took no offense. He thought it was funny as well. And I got a kick out of it, sharing it with them. Now we move forward to the spring training of next year in Vero Beach, and Vinny has a few minutes with me, and he says, Rich, I have to tell you something about the off season. He says, I had a couple opportunities to speak. He says, and as I finished up my remarks to the group, he says, I told them no matter how excited and blessed I had in my life, but if I ever need to humble myself and keep my ego in check, there's a little 5-year-old girl by the name of Laura who thinks I pump gas at your local gas station. And told the story. And when he told me that, honest to God, Bob, I had goosebumps on my arms like the back of a crocodile. I was taken back, and still to this day she has the baseball, and it's a special memory for us.
Vin is, we were blessed. You worked with the man. We were blessed just to watch him for all those years. And Vin is a treasure, and I hope he's around for another 100 years. But just listening to Vin call a game, when Sandy threw his perfect game, he shut up. He even said, I let the crowd tell the story. And that is what's missing from today's broadcasters. They have to be louder and, scream and yell. And Vin was just Vin. He just did it off the cuff. He just, it was almost instinct for him.
He knew when not to speak.
Exactly. And that speaks volumes out of a lot of these guys today who you almost have to turn the sound down. Jack Buck was the same way. If you want to get into Harry was a different animal, but Harry was different. He called the game as a fan, and Vin called it, as a professional. But you could tell when he got excited for the Dodgers. There was just that little bit of higher pitch in his voice, but he was not a homer. But when Sandy threw the perfect game, he absolutely was, because 2-2 to Harvey Keene, 1 strike away. That's going to be in my mind for the rest of my life. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. And the same thing with Gibson's home run. She's gone, and he shuts up, and the crowd is going ballistic. After he hit the home run off of Eckersley, and you just hear the cheering, and that speaks volumes of who the man was. He was not trying to be. He wasn't bigger than the moment. He was Vin.
Bob, do you mind if I throw in for 30-second pitch?
Absolutely.
I referred to what turned out to be one of my best friends and mentor, Fred Clare, who hired me back in '76. I don't know how he sustained this friendship with me and put up with me all these years.
Damn photographers.
Yeah, anytime that I get to spend time around Fred, I learn and continue to learn. But Fred, as folks will know, may remember, he was the general manager of the Dodgers and the architect of the 1988 World Series championship. In fact, it's the last one in over 40 years. and he's gone through a horrendous battle with cancer the last 4 years now. And true to Fred's makeup, um, he's spending most of his energy the last 4 years giving back to the medical center called City of Hope here in Duarte, California, uh, uh, who essentially saved his life and what he's gone through. He's put together a couple golf um, fundraisers and raised over $500,000 for research. And then he continued by writing a book, or he was the subject of the book that was written by Tim Madigan, a terrific author out of Fort Worth. And they wrote a book about Fred's journey, cancer journey, with City of Hope. And Tim Madigan did a tremendous job of weaving Fred's career uh, and also his medical journey. And it's a terrific book, just came out. And I would just ask folks if they don't mind, check it out. And it sells for $24.95. Every proceed goes back to City of Hope. Fred doesn't take a penny on this. It's meant for the City of Hope. And go to mascot dot. It's actually mascotbooks.com. Mascotbooks.com. And look for the book. It's called Extra Innings, and it's a terrific book. I was fortunate enough to have a close-up view of the process, and it's done very well. And uh, it's amazing how many people from his baseball family have come forward to help with this book, including the Vin Scullys and Tom Lasordas and everybody throughout those years have stepped up to help them. So I appreciate you giving me a chance to throw that pitch out there. It's
Anytime. I'm a cancer survivor myself, and everybody hates the C word. It's just, it's a horrible disease, and I hope we can, you and I can get Fred on, and we can chat about his book and his. I want to see you two interact with stories, and because I know you and Fred have a few stories that you could tell.
Fred will be the first to tell you don't believe a word that Rich
says. Yeah, I know. It's you hear stories, and sometimes like with the Lasorda and the Kingman tapes. And you and I talked before about the Jim Healy show, and Healy would play the hell out of that. What do you think of Kingman's performance? What the blank do you think of blank, 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 blank? Every other word is an F-bomb, but it's, it takes on a life of its own. It's just like the stories get bigger and bigger and bigger as you go down the road.
So, Bob, I sure appreciate the time that you've given me. And I know that the Shrine of the Eternals, the baseball reliquary, honored you last year, and rightfully so. So I'm glad that people are getting the word out and they're able to see your work. And please keep it up, and look forward to additional pictures.
I look forward to chatting with you again soon in the near future. Rich, this has been a great time. And let's we got to do this again, and just keep up what you're doing. You're one of my favorite people that I've seen shoot, and you have a great photo eye. And thank you again, Rich, for coming on and talking with me for a few minutes.
I sure appreciate it. You have a good week ahead. Thank you again, Bob.
Thanks. Okay, we're off. So, oops.